So I think I feel that psychologically I'm much stronger, and it unlocked a whole space where I had never ventured into. So I never imagined that I would be, putting my position in front of the board of such a big company to say that this is my point of view. Yeah, and also I think when, as you rightly said, I have moved or worked directly in three, let's say, at least continents and countries. I think one thing which I found, and it hit me very hard, is that all of us humans, right, and I'm removing even the gender at this point,
Mm,
all of us are essentially mind or consciousness, right?
mm.
Inside at the core, we all are same. So that has helped me understand or empathize little differently than maybe people around me.
Right.
And that develops compassion, right? Yeah, actually, when what I think is that, and maybe this is from my experience, so could be limited view, but what I've seen is that inequality, particularly, right, and it's basically human inequality, right? So could be men or could be women, right? I think it's just that we put some people in the unfavorable place,
Yeah.
but they deserve it, right? And that's how they're unequal.
Hello, team, and welcome to a very special episode of the ET Project. Special because today we hope to challenge your consciousness as leaders. This week's theme is all around learning to thrive despite living in a world where quite often the odds seem stacked against you. And I think it's a fair statement, maybe a little bit controversial, but I think it's fair to say that not everything is created equal. And when it comes to humans and society, there's many of us that have lived a more privileged life than others. And yet we've witnessed throughout history in our modern day as well, where the odds can be reversed and the less fortunate at birth can rise to the challenge and also conquer. So often the societal environment becomes the catalyst for navigating daunting personal and professional hurdles. And so in this episode, I'm extremely happy to have with us Miss Kanchan Chenana, to help us walk through some of the big questions and lay out the essential strategies for building resilience, fostering inclusive relationships and leadership, and aligning personal values in particular, even as I've said, when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. So, Kanchan, welcome to the ET Project. Wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Vane. I'm so delighted to be here and have this conversation.
So the audience will have heard me introduce you, and I will have mentioned that we're talking to you in Switzerland. You're over near Geneva. How is life in one of the beautiful countries around the world? How is life over there?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful country. It's very quiet, and I like the calm and peace in the environment all around. It's full of nature, a lot of every road is almost a trail, so it's very nice to roam around and be with the nature.
Right.
So I enjoy it. I love it. I'm here since a little over than 5 years now.
Wow.
So it's yeah, it's a beautiful country, and I definitely enjoyed my 5 years here.
Well, talking about how long you've been there, I mean, you have a really interesting background and journey. So I'm just wondering if you don't mind, if you could share a little bit about, that journey as you were growing up in what I believe, if I did my research correctly, you refer to as a non-inclusive society. And I'm wondering how it shaped your perspectives and your ambitions in your career.
Sure. So if I can take you right from the day I was born.
Mm, mm,
Um, if I can start my story from there. So I was born in a patriarchal family, and those days our family never wanted a girl child.
right.
So me and my mom were expelled from our family house, and we. So my mom took me to my maternal grandparents, and then in 4 years, I came back to my father, and my mom also came back, and so we reunited. So I think that was the start of my life and the journey. Then I started to go to school. I was good at studies, and that was, I think, one of the requests, or let's say demands from my parents, that be good at studies. So I think that I was doing. But otherwise, there were a lot of, let's say, practices or hesitations or norms. So I studied in a girls' school, I went to a government school. And so I was essentially, as a girl, I was being formed to be a daughter-in-law, pretty much. So a good daughter, which, forms into a daughter-in-law after a point in time.
Yes.
And when I was 17, I got into engineering college. So it is one of the top in India. And I chose to be mechanical engineer, and there was no girl in my class. So it was a very big shift for me to go from a girls' school to a boys' class in engineering. And it was a big shock. But the bigger shock came when, after my first year, my father passed away, and
Wow.
we were still doing very hand to mouth, and um, I had to make my fees to fund my studies. So that's when life really hit me hard, that what I was prepared for and what now life has become, there is no synergy or there's no commonality, and I have to fight everything.
Mm,
So, right after a week of my father's death, I started to work to fund my studies. And that was, I think, the first, let's say, practical challenge for me to face at my individual level. But it was not just it, because even as family, so I have three siblings, so we are three sisters and a brother, and my mom. So we were largely having women in the house. And even my mom was not shaped for a life without her husband.
right.
So we all were, almost left directionless. And and I also found that, relatives do not help so much as they claim to. So definitely, there was no help, and I think I feel that as a opportunity now. To be honest, like those days when you are facing something, you find it as a challenge. But in retrospect, I truly think that the event of my father's death actually shaped me a lot,
Mm,
because that transition just showed the real world to me
right.
and prepared me for future, let's say. So after my engineering, I joined an automotive corporation. There also, it was pretty much male dominated, and the field I wanted to get into was procurement, and there was no history of them hiring female engineers right after the college. And I challenged that to the chief procurement officer, and I win that. So that was my first ever, win in the non-inclusive to inclusive. And to the point that there was no written or formulated policy, but he
Mm,
said that from next year onwards, we are going to have half female engineers in my team. So I think that was a big shift. And that is the kind of leader I always, aspire to have
mhm, mhm.
again. I had some, but I think more the merrier, right? So that's how my career started. I did stay for 3 years. I was the youngest buyer handling the largest spend. And it was all, I think, good. But I moved on to do my MBA, and I did it in India and US, again from one of the top colleges. So it was nice. And then I moved to consulting after my MBA. So I did consulting for 6 years.
Mm,
My first 3 years were in US, the next 3 years were in India, and traveled a lot, worked with many clients and industries and various problems. One thing, I guess, which was slowly firming up was the relationship between power, authority, and money, right?
right.
And this is where I started to see that we have a lot of gap to catch up. So while we see these days that there are women at the workforce, but if I break it down into, let's say, real dollar and positions of power, and even if they have position of power, does their voice have a credit or that significance as equal, as comparable? I noticed a lot of drivers, so that I think somehow always was there. In 2019, I got an offer from a global firm in Switzerland.
Mm,
So they were building their strategy team, and I joined them. And that's where I think my world also opened to a very large organization. It's a global 500, the office, the headquarters in Lausanne. And the office has more than, I think, almost 2,000 people with 100 plus nationalities. So it was a really diverse environment.
mhm,
And I stayed there for 3.5 years. My first, I think, year and a half were really good, and I was doing quite well from a personal individual perspective. But I also started to find many observe many examples of this gap of pay, power, authority.
yes.
And I started to question, because this time I was not, they were not very subtle, but they were really factful. So, how the promotion process was done, how the hiring process was done, and how, during the process, one part would be slightly adjusted or skipped or
Mm,
changed. And that started to, so also because I was maturing as a professional right over the time, and I was able to see and pinpoint on some of the observations I had. And that's when the tough part started. I started to ask questions, and I think that was more, I guess, from the culture perspective, that this particular organization was not so very used to it. And in return, I was getting threats and all the difficult, behaviors and reactions from the senior leaders. So that was, I think, that intrigued me a little more, and I did the whole process. Eventually, we came to a point where I had a list of facts, and the only argument I got that we do it this way, which was very hard for me to accept as a professional. In all sincerity and honesty, I think this is very much against my work integrity. And I started to then step away. And eventually, last year, April, I made a move to to not be associated.
mhm,
Yeah, because as an individual, I don't want to support that kind of leadership or that kind of behavior. It's even like not inclusive, not inclusive. It's simply that in a professional setup, if you and I communicate, right, we should have an open ground to discuss and debate
yes.
the topics which are business topics. So I saw that this particular piece I could not explore, which was a no-go.
Mm.
So sorry for this long one, but this is my history, and that's how I landed last year. And yeah,
No, very incredible journey, and thank you for sharing so openly and transparently. But I'm there's a couple of points, and we'll come into the some more detail around what you've shared there. But a couple of things come to mind as I was listening, and I'm struck by the power of the mindset, and in this case, your mindset, as well as probably your self-belief, your determination, and how you've dealt with everything in your life. And I'm wondering, has that, if you look at that now, has that really been something that's evolved with you, that's helped you look at these societal norms or challenges and take them to task? Like, do you think it's based on your upbringing, this development?
yeah, I would say that yes, definitely there is a correlation to that. So, Wayne, I guess if I see myself, I've never taken a standard path. I have mostly taken non-standard path, whether it was my career or my personal life or my philosophy, right? So I think it gets manifested, and but to this particular incident, which we are maybe detailing a little more, it I started with because I thought that I can take up this challenge, and I had self belief. But on the journey, I also found myself that it was very, very hard. While I felt this is the right thing, but it was not easy. And
Okay.
that actually, so when I went through a difficult curve, I did hit a point where there were only two choices. Either I completely break myself or I evolve and come out, uh, stronger.
Yes.
So I think I feel that psychologically I'm much stronger, and it unlocked a whole space where I had never ventured into. So I never imagined that I would be, putting my position in front of the board of such a big company to say that this is my point of view.
Right.
And so I think even positioning that is, while I was in the business, I know that even people five or six ranks above me were not able to put a page to the
Mm.
board. So I know that. I think so psychologically, I think I broke many, many levels within myself.
Right.
And I think that's the winning maybe outcome for me.
So as you look back over that now, and I'm really enjoying listening to this conversation because there's so many things that we talk about as educators, and I'm listening to you and I'm seeing and hearing this personal resilience that you've had to find, and I'm curious, how did that resilience stay maintained? Like, did you have anyone supporting you? Were you totally against everyone, or like the resilience itself? If you look at Mandela as a great example, and there's a Japanese expression that says fall down seven times, get up eight, paraphrasing.
Yeah,
Um, Resilience is such a powerful thing that
yeah.
we all have the ability, but seldom, I would say, many of us face the challenges that you've probably encountered. So I'm just curious, how did it all play out for you as you look back at it?
Yeah, I think as I look back, so just to give a timestamp to my journey, the starting point was around July 2021, and I left them in April 23. So I would be honest that I started with, let's say, I always thought that I'm a brave woman, and I started with that hypothesis in mind.
Mhm.
And but right in July and onwards till the even after I left, the situations were absolutely crazy and tough for me. So to give you some specifics, right? I got threats, written threats, I got legal threats, I got abusive language, I got racist remarks, I got sexist remarks. I got people could shout at me. I think it is also to my listen to the listeners we have. I think I just want to tell that whenever there's a difficult situation, one of the things which I think the environment does is that they increase the frequency and intensity of psychological violence. So I think that's how I call it. And it was just piling up, and there was a point when I broke down. I would be honest here. I broke down, and I took time to really stop, let's say, the further addition of these events, and to at least process whatever I had gotten in very objective way. Because I think one thing which I really like being a business professional is that it's very fact based and data oriented. So I like to keep that even in the personal space.
Mhm.
And I could take these inputs, right? But when I distanced myself, and then it was very easy for me to take them as data inputs, right? And not really personal, uh, anything personal, right? And when I started to analyze, and that's when also I was trying to read philosophy, because philosophy is the topic which essentially questions the reason to exist.
Right.
And in a way, for me, it was a battle where I was trying to find my reason to exist there or somewhere else. So it was that actually added a lot of force in me. And then soon I was clear that which are the criterias will make it a go, and which are the criterias will not make it a go. And I was then very confident, but it did take at least 3 to 4 months downtime for me to understand and make sure that I'm very objective, and
Mm.
I'm not bringing my emotions or my um, feelings inside this problem statement. And also, what happened, I think, the big shift, Wayne, which happened in this 3 4 months was I started to see the problem as a macro problem and not as a conference problem.
Right.
That is very important. So even when I was standing up in the organization, it was never Kanchan's problem. The problem I formulated was almost 5 to 6 colleagues and not less. So it was not, anyways, never me per se,
Yes.
because I observed behaviors with even junior women colleagues and even male peers, right? So I think then I started to see that okay, this is a much bigger problem, and I am too small in front of the problem. In fact, the organization, even if I take the full size of the organization, they are also too small in front of the bigger problem you and I are talking about, right? So that started to shift, and that started to fill me with force. And but there was a downtime, and that build up resilience, that let's say depleted a large amount of fear in me. Because thus far, though my life was tough, but I was always admired by people. But this was the very first time that I started to see hate and resentment for me. So, which was, I think, the difficult thing to face.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so then I think the philosophy and blend of philosophy, objective, reasoning and understanding what are my go no go drivers. I think that made it easy. But just to give you a sense of it, the amount of analysis I did was no less than a large consulting project I would run at a client. So it was for me to analyze a lot of things, and just by my own, right? In a project you have team to deliver. So it was a big piece of thing or data which needed to be analyzed.
Which in hindsight is perhaps even why the reaction to your objection was so violent, so volatile, because they could see the data and the overwhelming data perhaps and starting to materialize, and they were probably very nervous. I can well imagine. I'm also wondering, so you grew up in India, you
Yeah,
spent time living in the States, in the US, you've now
yeah.
moved to Switzerland, you've been exposed to a very large number of different cultures with people that you've worked with. I'm wondering how much of this broad awareness of different cultures has played a part in your reaction. Like, you obviously have a broader awareness than many people, and
Yeah.
you feel that this shouldn't be the way it is. Was culture something that stood out for you, that you felt this is just not right, regardless of where it is?
Um, yeah, and also I think when, as you rightly said, I have moved or worked directly in three, let's say, at least continents and countries. I think one thing which I found, and it hit me very hard, is that all of us humans, right, and I'm removing even the gender at this point,
Mm,
all of us are essentially mind or consciousness, right? Because whatever you think, then only you act, and that gets manifested. So essentially, you are a bunch of thoughts, emotions, feelings, reactions, right? And same as me. So at that level, you and I are not different. Maybe our expressions are different, maybe our forms and intensities are different, our training may be different, but
mm,
deep down, if I have a fear and you have a fear, we both have fear, and that fear can be insecurity or can be in the form of not achieving or not um,
yeah,
having what you deserve and things like that, right? But at the fundamental root level, you and I both are, like some amount of fear. So that really helped me, at least when I see or talk to a human. I i like sincerely try and attempt not to put any judgment or any opinion, anything, right? And I've also improved, right? Like, I'm not saying that I was doing this right when I was born,
mm,
but as I progressed and I saw life, and I also saw that at the human level we all are same. We might have different color, gender, sexual and like orientation or culture or habits or practices, but I think those are just that's just the cover, right?
mm,
Inside at the core we all are same. So that has helped me understand or empathize little differently than maybe people around me.
right.
And that develops compassion, right? And compassion is the action, right? Because many times we understand the situation cognitively and emotionally, but that is not enough to take an action. You need compassion, because compassion drives action, because then you are in the mind of, or you are in the shoes of other in a truest form. So I think it's Daniel Gold who divides empathy into three parts:
Yeah,
cognitive, emotional, and compassionate empathy. And to me, I think if you don't have compassionate empathy, the first two are just good to know, like they're just information
yeah,
and it doesn't move the needle. So I try to make sure that at least I
yeah.
bring things into action and practice.
We're going to jump into inequality in a moment, but just before we dive off where we are in this conversation, one of the things that's jumping out to me is that this culture of fear within organizations, um, it's so widespread. But it's only when you get below the surface that you really start to see just how intrinsic it is. And, I just think of my own career, which is too long to even count, but um, politics, hidden agendas. We spoke about the dark triads, like the narcissists, the Machiavellianists, the psychopaths. I almost said psychologists, then I would have upset a lot of friends. But if I think about people that if somebody has their own agenda and they're wanting to progress their career, somebody comes along and somehow they sense there's a threat to my potential career, then I guess
Mm-hmm.
human instinct to some extent is going to kick in and there'll be this conflict. Um,
Yeah,
and if it's left untethered, then this whole cultural festering tends to happen. And within that, we
yeah,
end up with this culture of fear within organizations. And, as we look around the world at the moment with all the geopolitical um, challenges that are going on and the organizations struggling in many locations, I, I can just imagine how much this is festering around the world at the moment.
yeah,
Yeah. So sorry, it's more of a statement than a question, but it came to mind as you were talking there that let's jump into inequality then, because I know in your case it wasn't only female um, inequality in your team at least, um, but I guess if we were to generalize, most of the time we think of inequality and we think of females progressing in their career, being promoted,
yeah,
and also pay disparity, right? And again, male female disparity between the pay
yeah.
rates. Um, are there actionable steps now that you've been through this process? And I guess even within your coaching, are there actionable steps that an organization can take to try and address this inequality?
Yeah, actually, when what I think is that, and maybe this is from my experience, so could be limited view, but what I've seen is that inequality, particularly, right, and it's basically human inequality, right? So could be men or could be women, right? I think it's just that we put some people in the unfavorable place,
Yeah,
but they deserve it, right? And that's how they're unequal. Otherwise, of course, there would be a gradient. If you have
right.
a pool of humans, then you definitely have to grade. It's just that how fair you're doing it. I think one of the things which I found is that the way we do business, right, with the honesty and sincerity and objectivity, I have not seen the same rigor, that same uh, principles of integrity in the people process. So we essentially just need to see two as business processes
Mm,
and more because in the AI world, like the world we are getting into, uh, organizations will only have specialized talent because all the other day-to-day commoditized tasks will be done by machines, right? So if you have a pool of special talent and then you have to treat it properly. And they are very smart. So I also spoke to some friends in the tech world, and they told me that there the talent processes are much more objective. And then I was wondering why, there's such a difference. And I think the difference is because the tech world has a high talent, on an average, high talent individuals, and you cannot play them. So I think we don't need to think women, men, Asian American, or whatever. I
Mm.
think we simply need to say that this is how we evaluate business and this is how we evaluate people. And many times organizations do have processes which look objective, but how they are executed are not objective. And the only then, if an employee challenges, right, what is his or her way out is to take them to court. And that process is so difficult and so long and so time consuming and money consuming,
Yeah.
and even psychologically drains you out. No one goes, and that's why it goes on. And but what drives us to not follow the process is simply that because of familiarity, right? I am familiar to you. I feel secure when I have you. So I will push you forward because as a person, it's very convenient for me to have someone who doesn't challenge me,
Right.
nods all the time,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's how you would see that the large organizations, very few are able to meet, continuously grow their talent. And sometimes that at least the organization I come from, a lot of talent, and it won't be wrong to say that it's obsolete. And the reason because they're just there because they keep on nodding to
Right.
the
Right.
yes and silence culture, so everything is okay. And that is the price you pay for self growth or personal growth. So it's to me, I think the business mindset and objective execution is the key.
Mm.
If the organizations think that employees can never take us to court, and that's why we should not do this, and we should adopt cheap and shallow ways of doing things,
Yes.
they can do it. And I think it's a definitely leadership's choice. But as a person, as an individual, let's say as a leader, if who I want to be, I don't want to be that kind of or subscribing to that kind of a process. But the other thing, right, if I don't speak about the leadership, but I now speak about the individuals,
Yes.
and that's where I think fear, I think, is one of the key drivers.
Mm.
Because firstly, no one starts. So just to tell you that in the organization I was, there were so many reports floating around, inequality or whatever, like many, many gaps.
Mm.
But no one was standing, like very few people, hardly anyone stood up. And they knew that if they stand up, they will be terminated. So no one would stand up to the challenge. And all the reportings were in anonymous. So people were even afraid to tell their name if they have a point of view to genuine problem, because
Mm.
they know that if they tell their name, and then they will be targeted and thrown out. So it's a real sacrifice one might have to give or do. But also, I think it's the common intelligence we have, right? So when I started to even stand up, but no one could join me because, firstly, it was kept so secretive that something is going on. And second, um, even everyone was so scared to even speak the truth to power. So I think it's a collective responsibility. I don't think it should be solved in court or policies and laws, and
Mm.
I don't think so. In my understanding thus far, and in what I've seen in my experience thus far, the biggest wins or the accelerations you get in either in business or in team or in culture when the two sides come together and say let's do it, right? So it's also the bottom which plays a role. If I do not, let's say you are my leader and I do not ask you, then you will be exercising the power you have in on the basis of your own integrity and standards. So I think it's and that's how the system evolves. So that's my point of
Hmm.
view on it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it it's never black and white. I would guess, right? I mean, there's always that gradient of grey that it's a spectrum. Um, I was just thinking as you were speaking, and it's probably too early for you to give a categoric answer, but as you look back over it right now, what do you think the impact of taking a stand is for you, and how do you see that might play out in the future?
So for me personally, I think I have I am now very let's say more clear about my own self
Hmm.
and how do I want to come in the world of work
Right.
and deliver my service. So I think that has become much clearer to me now. But as I go on with life, I think I will have to see different context and weigh in, uh, and and then measure if I want to play a role or I don't want to play a role.
Mm.
So for me, I think it was a big eye opener to see that how capitalism works within a large company
Right.
and in a diverse environment and a very complex team structure and how things are made kept visible and kept invisible both. So I think to understand that drivers
Mm.
and see those like relate to them in my own life, right? Like we all hear big things that leaders are corrupt and this and that, but now I at least can tie that to my real life experience.
Right.
And that brings a lot of clarity, right, Wayne? I think that brings a lot of clarity. And now I am, let's say, meeting people or whatever I venture in, I'm very open and direct about my value system.
Mm.
So that if someone doesn't need to partner or is shy of that, then I think it's a clear understanding for both of us.
Right. Right.
But also it has an impact on the organization, right, which I left. Because I hear from some of my ex-colleagues that things are shifting for good. I'm not sure if they are momentary or if they are
Mm.
for sustained shift. But I guess when one stands up, um, it's an energy, right? So it just explodes in both directions.
Mhm. Mhm.
And as an individual, I think the responsibility for me was if I see something, I say the fact about it,
Right.
and that's as a duty comes to my mind, and I did that.
Mm.
That's it. Good or bad, I think it can always be better. So, but I guess that's the start of responsibility. That in your own honest and sincere understanding, do you call spade a spade?
I can imagine 5, 10, 15 years from now, you'll look back at this as one of those milestone moments in your life. Um, and you look at how it shaped you as an individual, as well as a professional within your career, as it continues. So
Yeah.
I see it as a positive, even though at the time it was extremely difficult, I'm sure. But I'm very happy you've come out the other end. And there's an expression that my boss used to use with me quite a lot. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So, and I don't mean that
Yeah,
in a very negative form, but pressure makes diamonds, right? So
yeah.
it's kind of that outcome. As you're working with different clients at the moment, if one of your clients comes along and they're working in a toxic environment, based on everything you've been through, like, are you going to be able to remove any bias that you may have developed and sort of be able to guide them from that professional level? Do you think there will be any challenge in that?
No, I think even at my current place where I am doing my project, um, I think we are having very honest discussions.
Mm,
As I said, I think the environments are never toxic. We just make it sometimes, right? So everyone has a context. Everyone has a reason why they behave certain way.
mm,
And my approach is to first understand the drivers of people around me. And then if I spot something, I guess I'm more, let's say, now evolved to make a conversation more objectively and put it from a business lens, because I think that's another thing which shifted in me also, that how do I see social issues more as issues of real core things, right? Business performance,
mhm.
capability, which I think are precious assets to any organization. And it's never people, it's, I think, the whole context, right, in which you and I operate. So, so I think my approach is to fix the context and not the person.
Right,
Uh,
right.
yeah,
Which is a great approach, and many of us struggle with that, to be honest. So it's a great approach. You mentioned earlier philosophy, so I can't let that one go without just touching on it. Now,
sure.
when you talk about philosophy, are you talking about looking and reading modern day philosophers, or are you going back to the Stoic period, or where does your philosophy start and finish?
So, the philosophy, actually, the one I follow or closely resonate to is called Advait or Vedant philosophy. It's Eastern, very, very ancient.
Hmm, hmm.
And it's very interesting because it started as any human inquiry would start. So
Right.
the initial days, and this is same to Greek also, that initial days human was just worshipping, let's say, sun, because sun, if sun happens, then you get food. So you're saved.
Yes.
And as the period passed, right, we started to understand the physical laws of nature. And then human understood that, okay, sun, air, wind, they have, they are just in a flow. So they're exactly like a human, that I come and I go, and another comes and another goes. But then, as it evolved, it essentially, Vedas like took the evolution, right? And in the evolution, Vedas came to a point where they talked about the eternal source or consciousness.
Mhm.
And it's very scientific because I just visited CERN here in Switzerland. And CERN also had this story of Big Bang and, before Big Bang. So it
Right.
seemed like, the scientist and the philosopher are speaking same. So essentially, I think just two parts if I have to make the remarks. So the philosophy is about the true nature of self.
Mhm.
And the philosophy says that the true nature of self is which is devoid of anything, right? So any kind of belief, fear, assumption, attributes. So self is attributeless. And so that's very abstract. But then how do you take that abstract and manifest in the life you live? So it basically challenges that if the nature of self is, let's say, eternal or the highest, then it cannot have fear, right? Like fear should be practically absent,
Mm.
or greed should be practically absent. So things like that, and then it essentially, invites you to manifest it. And there have been very great humans who have manifested and have gone really beyond. Like if you see those humans, you can't imagine a human could do things. So it's the philosophy of, or the nature of self. The another thing is around the methodology, which I liked, and I think that is very v- I think the word can learn a lot just from the methodology, even if you don't leave the philosophy part.
Mhm.
The whole methodology of Vedant is discourse, like what you and I are having.
Yes.
And it's basically, if I have a question, the teacher, so there's generally a disciple and a teacher, and the disciple has a question, teacher gives the answer. And so this in this method, what I see is that even the difficult questions are not avoided.
Mm.
They are, in fact, the teacher or the leader sits down and takes full time to really answer. And so I think that is something missing in our current day leadership and even followership, right? Like I follow people just blindly. I don't even know if I should follow or not. So that's something I think from a methodology perspective,
Mm.
I think this is the only way to navigate socio political, economical situations, or any complex question can become simple if you allow that inquiry to happen. But if I don't allow the inquiry to happen, then there are doubts and fears and insecurities, and the question could be like little, but it is covered in so many layers,
Yeah.
which one tries to prevent and avoid and think. So that happened if I link it back to my story, in 2 years, right? I said that July 2021 to April 2023, I just piled on questions, and they just avoided, prevented, escaped, because and then you say, okay, why a business question is escaped or prevented by someone, and then you have doubts, right? So you clearly see that there is something wrong. So I think that methodology is very powerful, that it doesn't stop even a hard question, because it simply believes in that um, if it does not satisfy human reasoning, then it should not be there. As simple as this. So let's say if you
Mm.
might have a policy, but if your policy does not um, manage to surpass, like to satisfy the reasoning, then I think either the policy or execution is flawed. So that's the premise they take it, because the whole objective is to simplify and clarify the human mind who's talking to to the teacher. So I think that's yeah. So these are the two parts of the philosophy which hit very, very close to me.
It's definitely a fascinating conversation. We could talk about that for a long time, and go much deeper, of course, but I'm very conscious of the time. We're almost out of time. I have two more questions I'd love to just quickly run by you. The
Sure.
book, Hey Warrior, how are you going with that? Is that ready for a release? It's been released. What's the current status?
So okay, Wayne, I think this part we might have to cut from
Okay.
this conversation.
Okay.
But just the title of the name book at this point. So do you
Sorry.
want to repeat, or
Sure. We'll skip the question. Okay. So,
yeah,
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 let's skip
no
that
problem.
question.
All right.
But
Well,
it's going to be next year sometime.
okay, no problem. Kanchan, last question, because we're very close to the time. Aspirations for the future. You have a great career to date. What are you aiming for in the future? Let's say the next several years.
I think the next several years, what I'm really wishing and aiming for is if I can bring my efforts and experience and competencies in the service for better business models. And with that, I mean companies or startups or organizations doing work in climate challenge,
Mm,
health challenge, and equality. So I think these are three themes I would definitely love to focus on. And maybe going forward, I engage more with the youth, because not just this episode, but I think a lot of uh, my life had a series of questions which I think there was no one to answer to me when I was navigating.
mm,
So I would love to help them with a no filter, ask me anything kind, and give my uh, most factful or objective answer I could, just in the service so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So anything tabooed, anything not accepted is something I definitely would like to talk to the youth from across the world. Yeah.
very nice. Well, certainly, I think there's huge opportunity for you and for others to engage with you. Where can people go and find you? Where's the best place to connect?
I think the best place to connect with me is LinkedIn. So I write and post almost daily. I've just started this practice, but I'm quite active there, and I would love to connect with people if any part of my story resonates with them or they are navigating a part of it. I would be happy to be partner if I can in any way. Yeah, but also otherwise, I would be very happy to connect.
Mm. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners out there that can resonate very strongly with much of what we've spoken about today. So I'm sure uh, you may be careful what you wish for. There may be a lot of people, but I think we're going to have to call it a day. We're out of time, but thank you so much for the excellent conversation, really insightful, very thought-provoking, and I wish you all the very best for things in the future.
Thank you, Wayne. It was a pleasure talking to you. I love the questions and curiosity you have to know more about people. So I think I'm going to take this from you today.
Thank you.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.